Samurais, drama, action, and Kurosawa's flavor. All of this in the new PlayStation 4 exclusive. Does it live up to the hype? My name is Paulo, and I will tell you everything about Ghost of Tsushima in this video review. How is a legend created? How far are we willing to go to save our people? Are our principles and convictions more important than the fate of a nation? What is our real family? How do we go on when we have fallen into dishonor? Ghost of Tsushima asks many of these questions and tries to answer them in the course of a drama-packed story in which we have to save the island of Tsushima from an imminent Mongol invasion. This new offering from Sucker Punch, exclusive to PlayStation 4, learns from the last decade of third-person open-world action games to bring us a title that tries to make everyone happy but perhaps doesn't go all the way with any of its systems. This doesn't detract from the game, which with an immersive gripping exploration mode allows us to visit some of the most beautiful landscapes ever created in a video game. Until we come to a rushed third act which loses a lot of pace, impact, and quality. We are Jin Sakai, the last living member of the Sakai clan, one of the many samurai who gather on the shores of Komoda Beach to resist the Mongol forces led by Khotun Khan. Our leader, Lord Shimura, who, by the way, is our uncle, leads a heroic mission, dodging burning arrows that fly towards us. But the effort is in vain, and all the samurai are defeated. Shimura is captured and Jin Sakai presumed dead. A thief manages to rescue us from our inevitable fate, and we begin the tough task of finding allies and liberating Tsushima and Lord Shimura from the Mongol forces, while we try to restore faith among our people as they are subdued by an enemy force. To make matters worse, they feel that the samurai are extinct and that they have abandoned the people of Tsushima. The road to save this island is not going to be a simple one, but above all, it isn't going to be honorable at all. Quickly, both Jin and the player will realize that in order to defeat the Mongols, we're going to have to break the samurai tradition and use unorthodox methods that our uncle and parents wouldn't be proud of, but we're willing to win at any cost, even if we lose our honor. That is the great conflict feeding the plot in Ghost of Tsushima, and it is far more effective than the large-scale events happening at military level. Besides having to defeat the enemy, the thing that's most interesting is the internal struggle that Jin goes through as he has to break with everything he's been taught, and all which has been passed down to him over so many years. Sakai finally realizes he is forced to become something else. He has to become the Ghost to save the people of Tsushima. This region doesn't need a samurai who respects the bureaucracy and traditions of the shogun, but a warrior who's willing to do whatever it takes. The needs of the people and the poor clash with the tradition of an elite that has no answers for them. But Jin does, and he is there to help them. So by relying on these dubious tactics, we gradually win the affection and the respect of people that felt abandoned. The legend of the Ghost is born. This inner conflict translates into inner monologues and flashbacks where we remember the different teachings of our uncle, Lord Shimuna, who brought us up after the death of our parents. He taught us the samurai code, and every act that dishonors it is a knife in the heart for both him and Jin. The guilt and remorse of having to resort to dirtier techniques are present in the first hours of the game. But from the start, there is a disconnect in how this conflict translates at a gameplay level. Ludonarrative dissonance is a phrase that's overused and has become corny cliché rather than a great take when it comes to reviewing a game. But Ghost of Tsushima falls in this trap in a very obvious way. There is no penalty or reward if we decide to kill someone in the back, or do it honorably. We'll be using ghost techniques and killing enemies stealthily, even before certain cinematics or dialogues reflect on this. The drama that the character suffers never translates into our experience, and there is no need to opt for one path or the other. We can simply do what we like, even if our uncle, the samurai of the shogun, don't like it. Basically, we have two ways of approaching each combat sequence: the samurai style or the ghost style. The former is based on openly challenging our enemies to a duel with honor, where only one of them approaches us to fight. There, we must keep the triangle button pressed down and release it at the exact moment that our rival comes over to hit us. If we get it right, we eliminate them with one blow in a spectacular and bloody way. Once we do this, the rest of the enemies will all come at us, and we will have to fight against them, all at the same time. Although the game in normal difficulty allows you to deal with various enemies at once, it is never the best option, and it is always a good way to die quickly. If we don't want to go through that mess, the only option is to go against the ways of the samurai and attack with stealth. Hidden knifings, arrows fired from a distance, flying daggers or kunais, smoke bombs, and even poison are some of the tools we have at our disposal to dispatch Mongols without drawing attention to ourselves. Neither of the two ways of confronting the enemies is entirely original, nor do they stand out for their control, mechanics, or elegance. Perhaps where the game most distinguishes itself, or where it takes on an identity of its own, is when we fight with our katana without hiding. Ghost of Tsushima is no Dark Souls, nor is it a traditional hack and slash. Rather, it chooses to translate some sensations of the Batman Arkham combat, but in a samurai way. This means that we're going to be surrounded by enemies, dodging their attacks or parrying at the exact moment, and with just a couple of blows we can eliminate them. The opportunity for parrying is quite big, which makes it accessible for any kind of player without creating a more demanding experience like Sekiro. The good news is that if we just cover ourselves, we'll block all the damage, but if we defend ourselves at a specific moment, we're going to be able to counterattack. Ghost of Tsushima gives us a lot of tools to play out our greatest samurai fantasies without too much effort. This doesn't mean that we won't occasionally die, but it's pretty permissive about how we heal ourselves, how to dodge, and how to time certain actions. This generates a good flow in the combat that starts with few options but gradually gives us more tools and variety. As we advance, we unlock different stances that give us advantages over certain enemies. For example, one stance is more effective against enemies with spears. Another is useful for those who have shields. One for the ones who use swords. And also one that works against larger enemies called brutes. Changing the stances is fairly intuitive, and choosing the right one allows us to do damage to break the enemy's posture and leave them exposed to a fatal attack. These techniques are also there for us when we have special one-on-one duels. These are very cinematic moments where the camera is positioned closer to the ground and our character. These boss fights give us some of the most challenging and intense moments in the game, and it is in these encounters that Ghost of Tsushima really comes into its own, and we feel like we're in the greatest samurai movie. Except for these specific duels, in the rest of the battles we have a higher camera that allows us to see various enemies at once. It isn't particularly uncomfortable, but Ghost of Tsushima makes a fatal error in not giving us the possibility to do a lock-on against enemies. I understand that at times we will have so many around us that maybe it wasn't the best idea to fix the camera on one of them, especially when we're going to be picking them off pretty quickly. But the result is that on more than one occasion, and even after dozens of hours playing, we're going to be flinging our katana at the air or in directions that we don't want to because we don't have a way to select an enemy. The button layout also makes it difficult, almost impossible, to move the camera and attack at the same time. This means that we often receive blows from an enemy that doesn't appear on screen, and we end up guessing where they are and hitting them off camera, as if this was an old-fashioned beat-em-up. This is a small detail, but one that always annoyed me and that more than once made me lose. The studio probably debated a lot over whether to have a lock-on system or not, and they must have their reasons for choosing to leave it out. Unfortunately, it's a stone in your shoe and one that you can never remove. Where everything becomes a little more generic is when we want to complete missions or eliminate Mongols through stealth. The deja vu effect in these cases is too great, and the enemy patterns are very repetitive and predictable. with an artificial intelligence that doesn't appear to see us, even when we're practically next to it. Many of the techniques that we've seen in a lot of other third-person open-world action games make a comeback. Hiding in tall grass, using poison darts that drive our enemies crazy, aerial takedowns, among others. It's a very well-known formula and offers nothing new. This aspect of the game is perhaps the least entertaining way to approach encounters, but at the same time, it is the most effective as we can be overwhelmed by our rivals on more than one occasion. While going at it full on makes us feel like a real samurai. Being the ghost turns us into a second-hand ninja. The combat in Ghost of Tsushima ends up being a combination of good intentions with some clumsy parts, and also with a fairly familiar system. It's always entertaining and dynamic enough not to become boring, even after dozens of hours of play. But it doesn't go all the way with any of its mechanics. By wanting to keep all players happy, it doesn't revolutionize either style of combat or demand too much of the user. There are also some mechanics that are tricky to understand why they're in the game at all, almost as if they were filler or they were out of obligation. For example, on many occasions we'll have to observe the battlefield to evaluate what the best approach is, but we always end up choosing a predetermined option that the game had already established. It's an illusion of choice. On the other hand, it is fair to say that combat is very visually appealing, with spurts of blood everywhere, with good animations every time our katana clashes with another weapon, or when we parry at just the right time. If there is something that Ghost of Tsushima gets right, it's creating experiences that feel cinematic when we're playing them. The missions we have to complete are also extremely repetitive and familiar. The only solution to any conflict is combat, so every mission takes us from point A to point B, where we fight a group of Mongols. We might have a brief, flat moment of investigation by Jin, in a bad imitation of Geralt of Rivia, but nothing deeper than that. I get it. This is not an RPG with dialogue choices or decision making that makes the story branch out. But the result is a succession of missions that at no time change or surprise us. The most spectacular ones are large-scale sieges at key moments in the story. Fighting alongside other companions feels stunning, and these are epic, exciting moments, where the music grows and gives us goosebumps. It's a shame there are only 4 in the whole game. The rest of the quests bring us face to face with the same type of enemies practically from the start, and besides from occasionally using a huacha, a kind of turret that launches burning arrows, there's no creativity or variety. We'll welcome every boss fight as they at least give us a change of pace to top it all. As we get into the third act, the missions are increasingly similar, shorter and less elaborate. The feeling I was left with was that the last third of the game was rushed, and this can be seen in a complexity of the objectives, in what happens in the story, and is even exposed with some technical aspects where the cinematic and facial animation of certain dialogues are no longer well synchronized. The monotony of the objective gets worse with the fact that the story only has one tone: dramatic, serious, solemn, even sad at times. It never loosens up or relaxes. We can shake things up a little bit if we decide to concentrate on the open world and do secondary objectives. But even these secondary quests have the same heavy, dramatic tone because they are mostly tragedies. Aside from the main quest, we have a series of objectives called Tales of Tsushima, where each secondary character helping us to recover the island asks us to resolve a certain conflict. These little stories are super interesting, sometimes more than the main plot, and allow us to get to know amazing characters like Lady Masako, Yuriko, and Sensei Ishikawa. Unfortunately, they are divided into too many relatively short parts, and we take too long to reach the conclusion. It is a good way of giving greater importance to secondary quests and anchoring them in characters who we connect with emotionally, but ultimately, we always end up in the same type of confrontation and resolution. The only mission that definitely feels different are those called mythological tales, which take us off in search of legendary armor, weapons, and skills, and which are told by certain musicians around the map. On these missions, we have to find locations on the island with just an illustration or follow a clue to discover a secret altar, etc. They're pretty creative and always interesting to complete, but above all, they have rewards that feel significant and valuable. One clever aspect of Ghost of Tsushima is the way it organizes and gives importance to our equipment, especially our armor. This is not a game where the enemies drop loot or where we're going to grab pieces of armor constantly. Instead, it gives us a few options, but each one with very clear benefits and with different specialties. That's how we end up having one armor, more intended for combat, another that helps unlock greater portions of the map, one that gives benefits for the bow and arrow, another that makes it harder for enemies to detect us, among others. What never changes is our katana, dagger, or bow and arrow. Maybe some will find this disappointing because the only changes we can make to our armor are aesthetic. We can improve them but never change them. The whole equipment system, like many aspects of Ghost of Tsushima, is not extremely complex or developed, but in this case, less is more. That same philosophy translates to all the exploration system and the layout of the open world. Because this isn't a map that's full of things to do one after the other, or repeated settlements that we'll see again and again. Ghost of Tsushima has gorgeous open spaces, forests, lakes, mountains, and meadows with nothing close on the horizon. You take a breath from so much combat, and you can enjoy many of the stunning landscapes while riding your trusted steed. Simply put, exploring is a delight. Letting our curiosity carry us and allowing the map to surprise us is the best that Ghost of Tsushima has to offer. This is because, organically, it shows us where there might be points of interest or objectives. In a fairly poetic way, the spirit of our Father is present in the wind, and every time we set a waypoint on the map, we don't need a compass, or a mini-map, or an indicator on screen. Instead, by swiping up on the DualShock 4 trackpad, the window blows in the right direction and we have to follow it. The same applies for finding objectives within missions and getting our bearings in general. It's a very clever way of centering us in the world, never getting lost and never pausing the action. Not using fast travel to go to each mission and allowing ourselves to bump into things to do along the way is the best way to enjoy this experience. A question mark appears on the map, we select it. The wind guides us and we find it. That loop never gets boring. Plus, our curiosity is always rewarded because the spirit of our mother, present in certain birds that appear to us, guides us to discover a haiku to compose, thus obtaining a new cosmetic item, or a place where we can cut bamboo and have more resolve, an element that allows us to heal ourselves, or reach the hot springs where we can raise our maximum health. We can even follow foxes that will lead us to altars, so as to have more slots in which to better equip our character. Everything has a purpose and a benefit. Ghost of Tsushima doesn't make us waste time at all, with constant checkpoints, without the need to repeat long sections if we lose, and by being very permissive in preserving all our progress. One of the most interesting activities to do is to visit some shrines, usually located in the mountains. These sections are half puzzle, half platforms, where we can explore and climb certain places on the map until we get to the shrine and obtain a reward. Being on the top of these locations allows us to see Tsushima in all its greatness and marvel at its grandeur, its detail, and every one of its biomes. This island is divided mainly into 3 parts, each one corresponding to a different act in the game. We start with a pleasant climate, sunny, with a lot of vegetation and color. In the second act, as we head further north, everything becomes more dramatic, cloudier, and there is usually rain and thunder. Everything culminates in the highest section of the island, with snow, and with a fairly desolate map. Unfortunately, and like everything in the third act, it feels empty and without much detail or work put into it. Riding our horse in the open world is not only pleasant because of how this island is designed and how it takes us from place to place, but it's also sustained by a fantastic artistic direction and incredible visuals. Ghost of Tsushima is one of the most beautiful games I've ever played, but not at a technical level, as there surely is a video comparing the downgrade the game has suffered, since it was shown for the first time in 2018. However, the level of detail is superb, and we fall in love with every new section we discover, every new location we come to. The detail and dynamics of all the vegetation creates a moving painting that will have us using the photo mode all the time to try to get the best screenshots possible. Galloping at full speed on our horse and going through a field full of flowers with Jin leaning over to touch them is just one of the thousand of beautiful moments that Ghost of Tsushima has to offer. In terms of performance, apart from some occasions where there are too many enemies, or we enter urban settlements with a large number of people, the frames per second are fairly stable at 30. Even in a launch PlayStation 4, the platform the game was analyzed on. And in general, I didn't suffer any major bug or glitches. Every landscape is stunning, every piece of the character clothes and armor is beautiful, and every element of the setting feels alive. Enormous work has been put into physics, especially the vegetation and certain portion of our character's equipment. The blood or the mud that is impregnated in Jin's armor adds a lot to the cinematic feeling that the game goes for. There are many little details that add up to a visual experience that compensates for any other defect that Ghost of Tsushima may have, and adds to a really well-worked aesthetic. Every menu, every mission presentation, every time we sit down to compose a haiku, it all helps to immerse us in this samurai experience. The influences of the films of Akira Kurosawa are pretty clear to see, even if you're not so familiar with this legendary director's work. I honestly haven't seen his films, but I tried to investigate and learn a lot while doing this review. You've probably seen films that were inspired by Kurosawa, and you'll figure out what homages and references Ghost of Tsushima has. Aside from the obvious inclusion of Kurosawa mode, where everything turns black and white with an inferior sound quality that reminds us of those movies, and with a special film grain, there are many details in the cinematics, or within the game itself, that remind us of this director. For example, there is a certain intention in how the weather is presented. Kurosawa used furious gusts of wind to accentuate movement. Fire, water, and snow are always present and vibrant on the characters' backs while they are having conversations, or while we are simply in action or exploring the world. There are obvious references in the typical wipe transitions, which of course were also referenced in Star Wars. Even the main menu screen could be taken as a reference to the film Seven Samurai. But while we are in-game, one of the clearest instances of those homages is when the ghost stance is activated. At the moment, we are playing directly inside a Kurosawa film. After several hours of play and through certain events in the story, Jin learns a certain stance that allows him to eliminate enemies with just one blow, and inspire panic in them. This is a technique that shows his complete transition into the ghost, and a good example where Sucker Punch is able to combine progress in the story with gameplay. With the ghost stance, the whole game turns black and white, even if you don't have the Kurosawa mode turned on, and the wind starts to blow harder, creating a very cinematic playable sequence. The fear that Ghost inspires at the moment could be taken as similar experience to the panic that Mifune arouses in his enemies in the film Yojimbo. Fear becomes a combat mechanic even outside of the Ghost stance, making enemies run for their lives on some random occasions. It's a sign of how much the legend of Jin Sakai has grown and the respect he commands. Ghost of Tsushima ends up being a game as conflicted as its protagonist. The need to satisfy every type of player means it cannot fully polish all of its facets. There are outstanding parts, there are superb aspects in terms of general presentation, exploration, weather effects, landscapes, and the game's general cinematography. But as the game progresses, the thing that amazed us at the beginning starts to lose its appeal. The objectives become increasingly repetitive. The story in general starts to deflate, and its most dramatic point comes at the end of the second act. leaving a final act that is totally underwhelming, with the exception perhaps of the very last fight, and which needed more development time. Not being able to make good third acts is a problem that all Sucker Punch games have had in general, and they even made the same mistake they did in infamous Second Son, of giving us a new skill at the end of the game. The combat never stops being entertaining, but there is room for improvement, and all of the stealth sections hold the game back a fair amount, with various missions where we have to follow enemies without being detected, which are reminiscent of the worst open world games. Combining both facets, the samurai and the ghost, gives the best results, but we can only do that properly in the second half of the game, when we have practically all our skills and utilities. I feel that in order to enjoy Ghost of Tsushima as much as possible, the player has to take an effort to play it in a specific way. This means combining both stealth and samurai attitudes, not using fast travel so as to appreciate all the scenery, staggering the secondary missions so that they make more sense even though they're short, toning down the drama and solemnity of the story with tertiary objectives in the map, changing the voice acting to Japanese, even increasing the difficulty so that the challenge is greater as we advance through the game, and not the other way around, which is what happens, among various other things. Ghost of Tsushima is the culmination of many years of a genre that has had incredibly high points, each contributing something to open world games. However, this Sucker Punch title not only fails to bring anything particularly new to the table, but also doesn't raise the bar or represent an evolution in the type of mechanics that have made this type of games so popular. Maybe our expectations were too high. Maybe the curiosity to see what could be done by a studio whose last full game was 6 years ago played against it. Even the quality, from my point of view, of most Sony exclusives forced it to be up to the task. Perhaps all these factors end up affecting my appreciation of the game, but in no way does this make it a subpar experience or a boring one that I wouldn't recommend. I simply expected a little more, and Ghost of Tsushima fell short, while losing steam as the hours passed. Jin Sakai may have become a legend, but the fate and the future of this possible franchise remains to be seen. For all these reasons, Ghost of Tsushima gets a 7.5 score. Open world exploration, art direction and setting, and certain missions with epic large-scale sieges are some of the best aspects of the game. On the other hand, the worst part is the game's very rushed and apathetic third act, along with very repetitive mission design and also very generic and outdated stealth mechanics. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to turn on notifications. Follow us on social media and visit www.malditosnerds.com to stay up to date with the latest video game news. Thanks for joining us, and see you next time.